And the consequence of that, Tom, as we've seen over the Biden administration, is some quite loopy and insane policies. I mean, it's not just that they ran a bad campaign, that they overreached against Trump or talked down to the voters, but they have governed by putting woke on steroids, for instance.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's one of the bizarre kind of quirks of the recent period that Joe Biden, who at the last election was very much presented quite successfully as a reassuringly old school, not just alarmingly old kind of character. The fact that you even had kind of anti-woke voices suggesting if you want to strike a blow to wokeness, you should vote for Joe Biden. Day one, he was signing executive orders on racial equity, i.e. woke racial discrimination and gender ideology. And that has certainly contributed to this. I mean, it's not to say that it's the only issue, but it's certainly a issue. The fact that it seemed like the Trump campaign, if you read the reporting, we're staggered how effective that ad with that slogan they put out, Kamala Harris is for they, them, Donald Trump is for you. That seemed to be something which really cut through with people. And I think in a sense gets to grips with one of the enduring debates about populism, which is presented as very much a kind of binary discussion. Is this about the economy or is this about culture?
Yeah.
Is this about the fact that you've got working class voters who have been neglected by a liberal left, generally speaking, which has become increasingly oligarchical and detached from their interests? Or is this about cultural war issues as well as issues of immigration and so on? It's quite clearly both, and it always has been. I mean, I think you see that reflected in Trump's support base, which has always been, its core, the non-college educated, which on the one hand maps on to a degree to working class voters, blue collar voters, but also just people who, regardless if they're a small business person who's actually done quite well in life, hasn't gone through the kind of university process in which people get inculcated into those kind of elite cultural values. And so I think this has been a stunning reminder of that this populist revolt we're seeing is in almost equal parts a working class assertion of its interests via these candidates, a demand that their concerns about whether it's trade or immigration or the economy broadly, inflation being so key in this particular election, it's demanding for those issues to be taken seriously and to be part of the discussion. And on the flip side, it's also a kind of a pushing back against this woke cultural revolution, which has been waged over many decades, but was sent into complete overdrive over the course of the past few years, ironically under a supposedly more old school Biden administration. So I think it's a reminder that the populism thing, the phenomenon, cannot just be so easily boiled down to all these things. One thing that connects it, though, is that it is, as I say, in many respects, a kind of class based movement, but also one that really hits back against an establishment that isn't only neglecting their economic interests, but it's also become so detached from them culturally that you've got politicians like Kamala Harris saying absolutely insane things and not even realizing that most people would hear those things as being categorically insane.
Yeah, I don't know why this first thing that comes to mind, but transgender surgeries for illegal immigrants in jail as a sort of policy proposal.
I don't understand. Where is your sense of priority?
I know I'm a transphobic bigot and a monster. But, we talked a lot about Trump's flaws, but the candidate the Democrats landed on with Harris, I mean, those are flaws that the rest of us could see from space. And yet it seems as if, I don't know whether they persuaded themselves, were they lying to themselves? A lot of the media and stuff were telling us how brilliant she is and how, what a wonderful, she's run this flawless campaign. She's a great communicator. I mean, I don't think I've ever understood a sentence she's ever said.
Well, I thought your best description was that they came from the Pyongyang School of Journalism. It's first of all, okay, I'm sitting here in Southern California. I've lived in California for 50 years. I've more than 50 years. And I have watched California politics, and Kamala Harris is a confection. She was, it's almost like they went into a laboratory and they said, well, we'll have this and we'll have a little bit of that. And then, maybe, for Willie Brown's sake, a little bit of sex appeal of some sort. But, you run a candidate who, you got to remember, this is somebody who's never run against she ran once against a serious Republican, and her attorney general race. After that, it's nothing. And also she's the product of this establishment. I mean, the Atlantic has always been a little bit elitist from my point of view, but they sometimes did good stuff. In this campaign, they became, part of the Democratic National Committee. And you have Lorraine Jobs, whose best friend is Kamala Harris, and she owns it. And you sit there and you say, can you possibly expect that these people look into reality as it actually exists? I mean, if you live, if you're familiar with Silicon Valley, if you live above 280 in one of those really wealthy communities, Los Altos Hills, places like that, you don't even live remotely close to reality. I mean, even in my little Orange County middle-class community, I can walk into a overwhelmingly working-class neighborhood in about 5 minutes. These people live on a different planet, and they live in a world of private jets. They live in a world of extraordinary vacations. They are a privileged class, very much like the old Second Estate in France. I mean, and I think unlike, sort of the British aristocracy, they really don't even have they're not willing to put their lives on the line at all. And also that they are fundamentally not great believers in the United States. I mean, it may be hard for Europeans to understand. Most Americans are pretty nationalistic. And we think that this country is an amazing experiment. And instead, you're running against people who want to turn the country into a bad version of the EU, sort of like Brussels with crappy food. I mean, I don't see the appeal of that. Why would an American, I would say a Hispanic second generation person who's, an electrician, why would they want to have a society which is regulated like it is in Europe? Why would you want that? You wouldn't want that. And so, a lot of it is, how do people make a living? If you make your living with your hands, if you make your living in the private sector, you're much more likely to want a more conservative, more of a Donald Trump approach. But if you work for the schools and, the taxpayers are paying for your incredible pensions, why wouldn't you, support Kamala Harris? So the question is, I think the Biden people didn't have time to turn the country into essentially a government economy. I think maybe in the UK, you guys are ahead of us on that. I remember when I was there recently, people saying to me that, Starmer is the public sector. That's what he represents. And I think that's what Harris ended up representing, the public sector and that part of the corporate elite that lives off the public sector. The nonprofits, the green capitalists. Those are the ones who supported Harris. You've got to remember, you're going to start hearing, Trump won because he had Elon Musk and he had, these oligarchs. But as we've written, overwhelming majority of the oligarchs supported Harris. Now, it's interesting that the day after the election, they all bought stocks. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.